The storm came out of nowhere. One minute, the Wyoming sky was a placid blue. The next, it was a bruised, boiling mess of clouds that swallowed the sun whole. Rain didn't fall. It attacked, coming down in sheets so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in front of your face. It turned the dirt roads into roaring rivers of mud. It sent every living creature, from the toughest longhorn to the craftiest coyote, running for cover. All except for one. A lone figure stood among the gravestones of a small family cemetery, unmoving, as if he were carved from the same granite as the markers around him. His name was Nathaniel Thornton, and at 58 years old, he'd seen worse than a spring squall. The rain had plastered his silver hair to his skull and soaked through his thick woolen coat, but he didn't seem to notice. His knuckles were white where he gripped a bouquet of drooping wildflowers. 10 years, a full decade since he'd watched his wife Rebecca take her last breath in their bed. 10 years of waking up to a cold, empty space beside him. 10 years of running the Whispering Pines Ranch with the grim efficiency of a machine. The joy bled out of him like the color from those flowers. He knelt in the mud, his knees sinking into the cold, wet earth. "Brought your favorites, Becca," he murmured, his voice a low rumble lost in the howl of the wind. He placed the flowers at the base of a simple headstone. Rebecca Ann Thornton, beloved wife. 1825, 1868. He traced the letters with a calloused finger, his mind a whirlwind of memories. Auburn hair catching the afternoon sun. A laugh that could melt the Wyoming snow. A spirit so bright it had convinced him, a rough-edged rancher, that he was worthy of a love so pure. And he had failed her. "Should have listened to that doctor," he whispered, a confession torn from his soul by the storm. "Stubbornness. That's what took you from me, not the sickness." Just as the words left his lips, a bolt of lightning tore the sky in two. For a split second, the world was bleached, bone white. And in that blinding flash, he saw it. Something impossible. A figure dressed in white, moving through the trees at the far edge of the cemetery. It was a woman, her dress billowing in the wind, like a ghost's shroud. Nathaniel's heart hammered against his ribs. Rebecca. The name was a prayer, a curse. He squeezed his eyes shut, blaming the whiskey and the grief. It was the anniversary after all. The mind plays tricks. But when another lightning strike lit up the world, the figure was still there. Closer now, and it wasn't a ghost. It was a young woman, and she was wearing what looked like a wedding dress. She was stumbling, clutching her side, her movements frantic and desperate. Every instinct told Nathaniel to turn around, to go back to the warmth of his empty house and the cold comfort of his bottle. This was not his business. This was trouble he didn't need, but he couldn't move. Something in the desperate angle of her body, the sheer will it took for her to stay on her feet, rooted him to the spot. With one last lingering touch on Rebecca's headstone, he pushed himself up and started toward the apparition. She was so focused on the treacherous, muddy ground that she didn't see him at first. Her dress, once pristine white, was torn and smeared with mud. Dark hair, loosed from some elaborate style, streamed down her back like a black river. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. It illuminated her face, and Nathaniel Thornton's world stopped. For one heart-stopping, impossible moment, the face he saw was not that of a stranger. It was the face of his Rebecca, 25 years younger, but undeniably her. The same high cheekbones, the same determined chin, the same eyes wide with terror. His mind screamed that it was impossible, a trick of the light, a phantom conjured by a decade of loneliness. "Miss!" he called out, his voice raw and loud to be heard over the wind. "Miss, are you hurt?" She froze like a startled deer, her head snapping up. Her eyes found his through the driving rain. For a single, eternal second, they just stared at each other. The grieving, aging rancher and the ghost bride who had stepped out of his past. Then her eyes rolled back in her head, and her legs gave out. Nathaniel surged forward, covering the last few yards in a desperate sprint. He caught her just as she collapsed, her dead weight slumping against his chest. He was shocked by how light she was, as fragile as a bird. Up close, the illusion of Rebecca shattered, but the resemblance was still deeply unsettling. This woman was younger, her features softer, but the bone structure, the curve of her jaw, it was all there. He saw the dark stains spreading across the bodice of her dress. Blood, a nasty gash, wet blood from her hairline, and angry purple bruises were already forming on her pale arms. "Please," she gasped, her voice a threadbare whisper. "Help me. They're coming." "Who's coming?" he asked, his mind reeling. But she was already unconscious, her head lolling against his shoulder. "I've got you," Nathaniel promised, to her and to himself. With a strength that surprised even him, he swept her into his arms. "The ranch is just over that rise. We'll get you warm. We'll get you safe." As he carried the mysterious woman through the raging storm, he couldn't shake the chilling feeling that had settled deep in his bones. Her appearance at his wife's grave, on the very anniversary of her death, wearing a wedding dress and looking like Rebecca's ghost. It was more than a coincidence. It felt like a reckoning. The main house at Whispering Pines was built to withstand anything Wyoming could throw at it. Forged from local stone and timber, it stood 2 stories tall, a fortress of one man's will against a harsh and unforgiving land. It was a monument to permanence, a bulwark against loss. Nathaniel kicked the door open with his boot, carrying the unconscious woman into the dark entryway. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who knew every inch of his home by heart, navigating through the shadows to the parlor. Embers still glowed in the massive stone fireplace, casting a faint warm light on the room. He laid her gently on the worn leather sofa, her ruined dress pooling around her like dirty snow. "Robert!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the silent house. "Robert, get in here now!" Heavy footsteps thudded from the direction of the kitchen, and a moment later, Robert Morgan appeared. At 60, Robert was Nathaniel's ranch manager, his oldest friend, and the only person left who remembered the man Nathaniel had been before Rebecca died. He was built like an oak tree, with a full head of steel-gray hair and eyes that saw everything and said little. "Good Lord, Nat," Robert breathed, his gaze falling on the woman on the sofa, then back to Nathaniel's soaked form. "What in God's name happened?" "Found her by the cemetery," Nathaniel said, already moving to stoke the dying embers in the fireplace. The flames leaped back to life, casting dancing shadows across the room. "She's hurt. Get blankets, hot water, and wake Mrs. Fletcher. We'll need her help with this." He gestured vaguely at the bloody wedding dress. Robert didn't move. He was staring at the woman's face, his own expression unreadable, a strange mix of shock and something else Nathaniel couldn't place. "Is she alive?" Robert asked, his voice hushed. "Of course she's alive," Nathaniel snapped, his worry making his tone sharper than he intended. "Now go! Hurry!" Robert, startled by his friend's intensity, finally broke from his trance and disappeared to do as he was told. Nathaniel knelt beside the sofa, turning his attention back to the mysterious bride. In the flickering firelight, he could see her more clearly now. She couldn't be more than 22, with delicate features and skin so pale it seemed almost translucent. Long, dark lashes fanned out against her cheeks. Her breathing was shallow, but it was steady, a good sign. The eerie resemblance to Rebecca was less pronounced in the warm light, but it was still there. Something in the curve of her lips, the line of her throat. He shook his head, trying to banish the thought. It was the grief, the anniversary, the whiskey. It had to be. The woman's eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes were a startling, vibrant green, and they seemed to capture the firelight and hold it there. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "You're at Whispering Pines Ranch," Nathaniel said, his voice softer now. "I'm Nathaniel Thornton. I found you out in the storm." He paused, his gaze dropping to her torn dress. "Care to tell me what a bride is doing, running for her life in the middle of a Wyoming tempest?" Fear flashed in her green eyes. She tried to sit up, but a sharp wince of pain stopped her, and she gasped, clutching her ribs. "I have to keep going," she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "They'll be looking for me." "Who's looking for you, miss?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Emma Sullivan. And it's my stepmother, Victoria, And the man she promised me to. I, I ran away from my wedding. Nathaniel raised a skeptical eyebrow. Must have been some man for you to brave a storm like this to escape him. A bitter, humorless smile touched Emma's lips. He's Maxwell Blackwood. He owns half the gambling dens in Cedar Ridge. And he's buried 2 wives already. A cold knot formed in Nathaniel's stomach. He'd heard the name Blackwood, a man with a reputation for being ruthless in business, and even more so in his personal life. A man whose young wives had a habit of meeting tragic, untimely ends. How were you injured? Kate, he asked, his gaze falling on the gash on her temple. The carriage, it overturned a few miles back, she explained, her voice trembling. The horse spooked in the storm. I got free and I just started running. I didn't know where I was going. Just away. Just then, Mrs. Fletcher bustled into the room. She was a plump, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had run Nathaniel's household since before Rebecca's illness. She took one look at Emma, clucked her tongue, and immediately took charge. Men, she said, shaking her head as she shooed Nathaniel away. Standing around asking questions when this poor girl needs tending. Come along, dear. Let's get you out of this disaster of a dress and into something warm. Nathaniel found himself gently but firmly escorted from his own parlor, the door closing behind him. He retreated to his study, the half-empty bottle of whiskey on his desk calling to him. The clock on the mantel ticked past midnight. The storm still raged outside, the rain lashing against the windows like angry claws. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid, his mind churning. A runaway bride, appearing at his wife's grave, on the anniversary of her death, looking like her long-lost sister. It was too much. It felt like the universe was playing some cruel, elaborate joke on him. But there was nothing funny about the terror he had seen in Emma Sullivan's eyes. He understood the need to run. His own prison wasn't a forced marriage, but it was a prison all the same, built of memory and regret. She's resting. Nathaniel looked up to see Mrs. Fletcher standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. Her injuries aren't as bad as they look, she reported. Cuts, bruises, and a few cracked ribs. She's lucky to be alive. Poor thing is exhausted. She can stay until the roads are clear, Nathaniel said, taking a sip of his whiskey. Then we'll arrange to send her wherever she needs to go. Mrs. Fletcher gave him a look he knew all too well. It was the look of disapproval she'd perfected over 15 years. And where would that be, Mr. Thornton? She has nowhere to go, no family to speak of, besides that wicked stepmother. That's not my concern, Nathaniel said, the words harsher than he meant them to be. This ranch isn't a sanctuary for every stray who wanders onto the property. Even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Rebecca would have been appalled. She had collected strays, both human and animal, her entire life. Their home had always been full of people in need, much to his private annoyance and her public delight. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes softened, as if reading his mind. Mrs. Thornton would have taken that girl in without a second's hesitation. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Thornton has been dead for 10 years, he said, the whiskey making his voice sharp and cold. And I'm not in the business of collecting young women with complicated pasts. No, sir, Mrs. Fletcher said, her voice quiet but firm. You're in the business of letting the past collect you. She turned and left, her disapproval hanging in the air. Nathaniel sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. The old woman was right, of course. He stared out the window at the storm, at the 20,000 acres of prime Wyoming land he had tamed and cultivated. It was his kingdom, his empire, and on nights like this, it felt like nothing more than a beautifully decorated tomb. His eyes fell on the silver-framed photograph on his desk, Rebecca smiling, surrounded by the roses she had loved so much. The picture had been taken just a few months before the first, tiny cough that had signaled the beginning of the end. What am I supposed to do, Becca? He murmured to the silent image. You send me a ghost, a mystery, a girl who looks like you and is running from a monster. What am I supposed to do with that? Only the storm answered, its fury matching the one raging inside his own chest. Emma awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a moment she had no idea where she was. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating a room that was both elegant and comforting. The furniture was solid oak, the walls were painted a soft blue, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the bedside table. Then the memories came rushing back. The wedding dress, the overturned carriage, the terrifying darkness of the storm, and the gruff, sad-eyed man who had carried her out of it. She sat up slowly, a sharp pain in her ribs reminding her of her injuries. Someone had changed her out of her ruined wedding dress and into a clean cotton nightgown. It was too big for her, clearly made for a taller woman, but it was soft and warm. Her small beaded purse lay on the dresser. She sighed in relief. Her most precious possession was still there. She moved carefully to the dresser and looked in the mirror. A stranger looked back at her, pale, bruised, with a bandage on her forehead, and eyes that held the shadows of a hunted animal. She reached for her purse and her fingers closed around the familiar, cool, oval shape inside. The locket. It was her only link to the mother she barely remembered. A simple silver oval with a tiny diamond in the center. Inside, a miniature portrait of a woman with kind eyes and a mysterious smile. Her father had always told her his first wife, Rose, was a simple farmer's daughter who died of a fever. But Emma had always felt there was more to the story, a secret her father took to his grave. A soft knock came at the door. "Miss Sullivan, are you awake?" It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher. "Yes, please, come in." Mrs. Fletcher entered, carrying a tray laden with a feast. "Thought you might be hungry," she said with a warm smile. "Nothing mends the body like a good breakfast." Emma's stomach rumbled loud enough for them both to hear. "Thank you," she said, a blush creeping up her cheeks. This is incredibly kind." "Nonsense," the housekeeper waved it away. "I've laid out some clothes for you. They belong to, well, they might be a bit big, but they'll have to do." She hesitated for a moment, a flicker of sadness in her eyes before her brisk, cheerful demeanor returned. "Eat up. Mr. Thornton wishes to speak with you when you feel up to it." The thought of facing her rescuer in the clear light of day made Emma's stomach flutter with nerves. What must he think of her, a damsel in distress, bringing a hornet's nest of trouble to his quiet life? After Mrs. Fletcher left, Emma ate every last bite of the delicious meal. Then she examined the clothes left for her. It was a simple dress of blue cotton, practical and well-made, with delicate white flowers embroidered at the collar. Like the nightgown, it was too large, but it was clean and sturdy. As she dressed, she couldn't help but wonder about the woman who had owned these clothes. Mr. Thornton's wife, she presumed. The room itself felt like a guest room, well kept but lacking a personal touch, as if its occupant had been gone for a very long time. Steeling herself, she made her way downstairs. The house was even grander than she'd realized in the dark. High ceilings, spacious rooms, a curious mix of rugged, masculine furnishings and delicate, feminine touches. It was a house that was missing someone. She found Nathaniel Thornton in his study. He sat behind a massive desk covered in ledgers, sunlight streaming through the window and illuminating the silver in his hair. In the daylight, he was a handsome man, with a face carved by the wind and the sun, but his eyes, a startling blue, held a deep, weary sadness, as if he had long ago given up on finding any joy in the world. He looked up as she entered. "Miss Sullivan, you're looking better." "Yes, thank you, Mr. Thornton," she said, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did last night." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. The storm has passed, but the roads are impassable. You're welcome to stay until they clear. But I need to know one thing." His blue eyes pinned her in place. "What kind of trouble is following you to my door?" The bluntness of the question took her by surprise, but she knew it was fair. "My stepmother, Victoria, arranged for me to marry Maxwell Blackwood. The wedding was supposed to be last night." "And you objected?" he asked, his tone neutral. A flash of anger cut through her fear. "Wouldn't you? Mr. Blackwood is 45 years old. His first wife died of a sudden illness. His second fell down a flight of stairs. He has a reputation for cruelty." A flicker of interest appeared in Nathaniel's eyes. "So you ran?" "I had to," she said, twisting her hands in her lap. "Victoria is my legal guardian until I turn 25. The marriage contract is ironclad. She arranged it all with the local magistrate, who happens to be a good friend of Mr. Blackwood's." "Convenient," Nathaniel muttered, rising from his desk. He walked to the window, looking out over his vast ranch. Cedar Ridge is 30 miles from here. If they're searching for you, they'll find their way here eventually. The fear returned, cold and sharp. I'll leave as soon as I can. I won't bring trouble on you. And go where? He asked, turning to face her. His expression wasn't unkind, but it was brutally honest. You have no family, no money. Blackwood is a powerful man. Running without a plan is just a slower way to get caught. His words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had been so focused on escaping that she hadn't truly considered what came next. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. I can work, she said, lifting her chin, desperate to project a confidence she didn't feel. I can cook. I can clean. I'm not afraid of hard work. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw a hint of something that might have been respect in his eyes. I don't doubt it, Miss Sullivan. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his options. Perhaps you could stay here, for a while. Emma stared at him, stunned. Why? Why would you do that for a stranger? His gaze drifted to the silver-framed photograph on his desk, the woman with the kind eyes and auburn hair. Let's just say, I have my reasons, he said, his voice quiet. The subject was clearly closed. You'll earn your keep, of course. Mrs. Fletcher can always use another pair of hands in the house. It wasn't charity, it was a job. Shelter and protection in exchange for her labor. She could live with that. She could do that. Thank you, Mr. Thornton, she said, relief washing over her so powerfully she felt dizzy. I accept. I promise I won't be a burden. See that you aren't, he replied, but the harshness of the words was softened by a flicker of warmth in his sad blue eyes. He turned his attention back to his ledgers, a clear dismissal. She rose to leave, wincing as her ribs protested. Miss Sullivan, he called out as she reached the door. She turned back. It took courage to run, he said, his eyes still on his papers. Whatever her faults, your stepmother was wrong. You wouldn't have been happy with a man like Blackwood. Coming from this stoic, guarded man, the words felt like the highest praise. Thank you, Mr. Thornton, she whispered. As she closed the study door behind her, she didn't see him finally look up. She didn't see the way his gaze lingered on the empty space where she had stood, or the way his hand reached out and his fingers gently, unconsciously, traced the edge of the silver frame holding his dead wife's picture. The days that followed settled into a strange and quiet rhythm. Emma worked hard, helping Mrs. Fletcher, learning the routines of the sprawling ranch house. And as she worked, she began to notice things. The ranch itself was a marvel of efficiency. The cattle were healthy, the fences were mended, the barns were pristine. Nathaniel Thornton ran his business with meticulous, almost obsessive precision. But the house was different. It was clean, but it felt preserved, as if time had stopped 10 years ago. The most telling sign was the garden. Visible from Emma's bedroom window, it was a tangled, overgrown wilderness. But beneath the choking weeds, she could see the ghost of a magnificent garden, laid out with love and an expert's eye. Wild roses fought for sunlight against thorny vines, their beautiful, sad faces a testament to a long-abandoned passion. And then there was the room at the end of the upstairs hall. The door was always closed. Emma never tried to open it, but a palpable sense of loss seemed to seep from under the door. She knew, without anyone having to tell her, that it had belonged to the woman in the photograph, the woman whose clothes she was now wearing, Rebecca. One afternoon, while hanging laundry in the bright spring sunshine, she was approached by Robert Morgan, the Quiet Ranch manager. He had been polite but distant since her arrival, as if he wasn't sure what to make of her. Miss Sullivan, he said, tipping his hat, you're looking stronger. I'm feeling much better, thank you, Mr. Morgan, she replied, pinning a sheet to the line. He studied her for a moment with an unnerving intensity. Nathaniel says you're staying on. If that's all right, she said, I'm just trying to be useful. It's not my place to say, Robert replied, his gaze drifting towards the overgrown garden. But this place has been quiet for a long time. Too quiet. He seemed about to say more, then shook his head as if changing his mind. Nathaniel mentioned you might want to learn to ride once your ribs are healed. There's a gentle mare in the stables that would be perfect for a beginner. Emma's face lit up. Oh, I'd love that. I've never had the chance. Robert looked genuinely shocked. Never? A young woman in Wyoming? I grew up in Kansas, she explained. My father was a shopkeeper. And after he married Victoria, she trailed off. Victoria didn't approve of unladylike pursuits. Robert's expression darkened. Grief does strange things to people, he said, his voice heavy with meaning. Makes some harder, makes some softer, and some, it just hollows them out. Emma thought of Nathaniel, of the fortress he had built around his heart. Yes, she said softly. I suppose it does. That evening, a strange thing happened. Emma was in the kitchen preparing dough for biscuits when she found herself humming an old, half-remembered tune. It was a lullaby her mother Rose used to sing to her when she was just a small child. It was one of the only clear memories she had of her. The melody always brought her a sense of peace. That song. The voice from the doorway made her jump, nearly dropping the biscuit cutter. Nathaniel stood there, his face pale, his posture rigid. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't hear you. The song, he said again, his voice tight, strained. Where did you learn it? The intensity of the question surprised her. I don't know exactly. My mother used to sing it to me. Nathaniel stared at her, and for a moment she saw a flicker of raw, unguarded pain in his eyes before he masked it. It was my wife's favorite, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Rebecca, she used to hum it in the garden. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. Emma put down the biscuit cutter, suddenly hyper-aware that she was wearing this dead woman's dress, sleeping in what might have been her room, and now humming her favorite song. It was a coincidence. It had to be, but it was a deeply unsettling one. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to stir up painful memories. Everything in this house stirs up memories, Miss Sullivan, he said, his voice flat. He looked so profoundly lonely in that moment that Emma's heart ached for him. On pure impulse, she crossed the small space between them and gently laid a hand on his arm. But you've kept going, she said. You've built something that will last. That takes a different kind of courage. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face, his expression one of pure surprise. The careful mask he wore seemed to crack, just for a second, and she saw a glimpse of the man beneath. A man capable of deep feeling, of profound grief, of a vulnerability he kept locked away from the world. Then the moment was gone. He stepped back, the invisible wall between them rising once more. Supper smells good, he said, his tone deliberately casual. I'll tell the men to wash up. As he walked away, Emma returned to her biscuits, but the simple, comforting lullaby now echoed in her mind with a chilling, unanswerable question. What were the odds? A week later, Victoria came for her. Emma was in the corral, taking a riding lesson from Robert, when they saw the dust cloud on the horizon. 6 riders approaching fast. Nathaniel, who had been watching from the porch, went still. Robert, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Get her inside, through the back. Terror, cold and familiar, seized Emma. Is it? It is, Nathaniel said grimly, his eyes fixed on the approaching riders. He didn't have to say the name. From the kitchen window, Emma watched as the group reined in their horses in the front yard. There was Victoria, as elegant and cold as ever, perched on a black mare. Beside her, Sheriff Hollister, a man Emma knew was in Maxwell Blackwood's pocket, and behind them, 4 rough-looking men who were definitely not deputies. Nathaniel strode out onto the porch to meet them, his posture relaxed but radiating an authority that stopped them in their tracks. Emma couldn't hear the words, but she could see the confrontation escalate. Victoria's imperious gestures, the sheriff's uncomfortable shuffling, and Nathaniel, standing like a rock, unmovable. Suddenly, Victoria pointed a gloved finger toward the house, her voice rising in anger. Then the whole group, led by a furious Victoria, began to move towards the front door. They're coming inside, Robert warned from beside her. Upstairs, now. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she raced up the stairs to her room. She heard their footsteps on the stairs, and a moment later, her door was thrown open. Victoria stood there, her blue eyes glittering with triumph. "There you are, you ungrateful little wretch." "Hello, Victoria," Emma said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Did you really think you could hide?" Victoria swept into the room, Sheriff Hollister hovering behind her like a nervous shadow. "Maxwell is very displeased, but he is a forgiving man. You will come home, and you will honor the contract." "I'm not going back," Emma said, lifting her chin. Victoria's smile was a razor's edge. "Oh, you are. You see, dear, the sheriff isn't just here to escort you home. He has a warrant for your arrest." "Arrest?" Emma echoed, stunned. "For what?" "For theft," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You stole my mother's pearls and a pair of diamond earrings before you fled. Family heirlooms." "That's a lie," Emma gasped. "I took nothing." "It's your word against mine, dear," Victoria purred. "And I am a respected widow. You are a hysterical girl who ran away from her own wedding." "That's enough, Mrs. Sullivan." Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the room. He radiated a quiet, simmering rage. "Sheriff, I'd like to see this warrant." Hollister reluctantly produced the document. Nathaniel scanned it, his face unreadable. "This is a legitimate charge, Mr. Thornton, signed by the judge himself." "I don't care if it was signed by the president," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously soft. "Miss Sullivan is under my protection. She is not leaving this ranch." "You are obstructing justice," Victoria shrieked. "I am preventing a kidnapping," Nathaniel countered. "This warrant is a fraud, and we all know it. Now you have two choices. You can turn around and ride off my land, or you and your hired guns can try to take her. But I will warn you, only one of us has buried a wife on this property, and I am in no hurry to bury another." The threat, delivered with such cold, calm finality, hung in the air. The sheriff paled. Even Victoria seemed taken aback by the raw intensity in Nathaniel's eyes. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Emma held her breath, watching the silent battle of wills. Finally, Victoria's expression shifted from fury to something colder, more calculating. "Very well, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice like honeyed poison. "We will do this your way, through the courts. But you should know that interfering in a family matter will have consequences." Her eyes shifted to Emma, and a chill snaked down Emma's spine. "I always knew you'd find your way to a place like this," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant only for Emma. "Like mother, like daughter." Before Emma could even process the strange, cryptic words, Victoria turned and swept out of the room, the sheriff and her hired thugs trailing in her wake. They were gone. For now. Emma sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly weak. But it wasn't the threat of arrest that shook her to her core. It was Victoria's parting shot. Like mother, like daughter. What did she mean? She was talking about Rose, the simple farmer's daughter. Why would she say something like that? Downstairs, she could hear Nathaniel and Robert talking in low, urgent tones. She had been saved, but she knew this was just the beginning. Victoria would not give up. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Whispering Pines ranch, Emma was left with a chilling, inescapable feeling. The key to her future, and the key to escaping Victoria forever, was somehow tangled up in the mystery of her long-dead mother. The next few days at Whispering Pines were thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. Nathaniel rode into Cedar Ridge and confirmed the worst. The theft charges were legally sound, at least on paper. Judge Montgomery, an honest man, was bound by the law. He gave Nathaniel 1 week to produce evidence of fraud before he would be forced to issue an arrest order that the sheriff could not ignore. "It's blackmail," Robert fumed that evening in Nathaniel's study. "She's using these fake charges to force Emma back to Blackwood. Knowing it and proving it are two different things," Nathaniel said, staring into the depths of a whiskey glass. Emma sat by the fire, Victoria's cryptic words still echoing in her head. Like mother, like daughter. "We need to know what she meant by that," Nathaniel said, as if reading her mind. "It suggests she knows something about your mother, Emma, something that connects her to this place." "But my mother never left Kansas," Emma insisted. "She died there when I was 7. "And yet," Nathaniel countered gently, "you know Rebecca's favorite lullaby." Robert, who had been pacing the room, suddenly stopped. "Nat, what if we're looking at this all wrong? What if Victoria's story is the lie? All of it? Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. Explain. I'll ride to Cedar Ridge tomorrow, Robert said, a new determination in his voice. Not to see the judge. To dig. To ask questions about Victoria Sullivan, or whatever her name was before she married your father. Small towns have long memories, and a woman like that leaves a trail. The next evening, Robert returned, his face grim. He waited until after supper, until he and Nathaniel were alone in the study, with a bottle of the good whiskey between them. Emma, too anxious to sleep, lingered in the hallway, her ear pressed to the crack in the door. It's worse than we thought, Nat, Robert began, his voice low. Victoria wasn't born a Sullivan. Her maiden name was Blackwood. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Maxwell Blackwood's sister? Nathaniel's voice was sharp with disbelief. His younger sister, Robert confirmed. And that's not the half of it. Years ago, before she married Emma's father, Victoria Blackwood was engaged to a young doctor in Cedar Ridge, a man named William Hayes. The name meant nothing to Emma. The engagement ended suddenly, Robert continued. Victoria left town for a few months. When she came back, she was different, colder, and Dr. Hayes, he was found dead in his office. A suicide, they called it. A heavy silence filled the study. But what does this have to do with Emma? Nathaniel finally asked. Here's the thing, Nat, Robert said, his voice dropping even lower. Before Dr. Hayes was engaged to Victoria, he was seen around town with another young woman, a newcomer, a beautiful girl from back east who had come to Wyoming with her sick brother. Emma could hear the sharp intake of Nathaniel's breath. Her name, Robert said slowly, was Rebecca Morgan. The world tilted on its axis. Emma leaned against the wall, her head spinning. Rebecca, her Rebecca, had known this Dr. Hayes. Are you saying that Rebecca and this doctor... Nathaniel couldn't finish the sentence. I'm not saying anything, Robert replied, just that the timing is strange. Hayes dies. Victoria leaves town, possibly pregnant, and marries Sullivan in Kansas. And a few months later, Emma is born. And Rebecca, Nathaniel whispered, his voice thick with a pain that reached through the door and twisted Emma's heart. She met me just a few weeks after Hayes died. A gasp escaped Emma's lips, louder than she intended. The conversation in the study stopped. The door creaked open. Nathaniel stood there, his face a mask of shock and grief. Behind him, Robert looked stricken. Emma, Nathaniel began. Is it true? She whispered, her eyes pleading. My mother. Was she? She couldn't say the words. The implications were too monstrous. Her entire life, the story of her quiet, simple mother, had been a lie. And Rebecca, the saintly, beloved wife of Whispering Pines, her past was a lie too. We don't know anything for sure, Robert said gently, but Emma could see it in their faces. This was more than gossip. This was a truth that had been buried for nearly 2 decades. I need to think, she stammered, backing away from the door, away from their pitying eyes. She turned and fled, not knowing where she was going, only that she had to escape the suffocating weight of all these secrets. She ran to the only place that felt like a sanctuary, the overgrown garden. The night was cool, and a million stars glittered in the black Wyoming sky. She sank onto a stone bench, her mind a chaotic storm. If Victoria was Blackwood's sister, if her engagement to Dr. Hayes ended because of Rebecca, then Victoria's hatred for Emma wasn't about a broken marriage contract. It was about revenge. A cold, calculated revenge she had been planning for 17 years. And Nathaniel. What must he be thinking? The wife he had worshipped, the woman whose memory he had preserved like a holy relic, had come to him with a secret that might now be living in his house wearing her clothes. The truth is never simple, child. The voice came from the shadows. Emma looked up, startled, to see an old man standing at the garden gate. He was a Native American, his face a beautiful road map of wrinkles, his eyes dark and knowing. Who are you? Emma asked, her heart still pounding. I am called Cloud Walker, he said, his voice calm and resonant. I knew your mother. He didn't say which one. He didn't have to. You knew Rebecca. I helped her bring her first child into this world, he said softly. A daughter, born too soon. She did not stay long. The closed room at the end of the hall, the nursery, the profound sadness. It was all clicking into place. You knew, Emma accused, her voice trembling. You knew who I was all along. I know that some souls have promises to keep, he said, his gaze fixed on her. He reached into a pouch at his waist and held something out to her. It was a small tarnished brass key. The answers you seek are behind a closed door, he said. But be warned, once a door's opened, it can never be closed again. He placed the key in her palm, his fingers warm and dry, and then, as silently as he had appeared, he was gone. Emma stared at the key. It felt heavy in her hand, heavy with the weight of all the secrets it could unlock. She knew exactly which door it belonged to. Her hands shaking, she walked back into the silent house and up the stairs. She paused outside the door at the end of the hall, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, satisfying click. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The room was a nursery, perfectly preserved, bathed in the soft, silvery light of the moon. A cradle stood by the window. A rocking chair waited patiently, a half-finished baby blanket draped over its arm, and on the wall above a small, cold fireplace was a portrait. It was a painting of Rebecca, seated in the garden, surrounded by roses. She was younger, her auburn hair vibrant, her smile gentle, and her eyes, captured forever in oil and paint, were the exact same shade of startling green as Emma's own. My mother, Emma whispered, the words feeling both foreign and profoundly true. Her eyes were drawn to a small writing desk under the window. On it lay a single, sealed envelope. The paper was yellowed with age. In a beautiful, flowing script, it was addressed with two simple words, my daughter. With trembling fingers, she picked it up. This was it, the truth. She sank into the rocking chair, the letter clutched in her hand, the ghost of Rebecca all around her. You have every right to read that. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his face etched with a pain so deep it stole her breath. He had been watching her. You knew, she said, not as a question, but as a statement. I knew she lost a child, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I didn't know she had another. He moved to stand before the portrait, his shoulders slumped. She never told me. All those years she carried that secret alone. He turned to face Emma, his blue eyes swimming with a mix of betrayal and a sorrow so vast it seemed to have no end. I failed her. I wasn't the man she could trust. No, Emma said, finding her voice. She was protecting you. She looked down at the letter in her hands. She had to know, for his sake and for hers. She carefully broke the seal. The letter was a single sheet of paper. She took a deep, shaky breath and began to read aloud. My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, then you have found your way home. I am writing this because the consumption that took my brother now takes me, and I cannot leave this world without telling you the truth. Your father was Dr. William Hayes. We loved each other, but he was promised to another. When I discovered I was with child, I was terrified. I fled to Kansas, where my cousins agreed to raise you as their own, to give you the name and the life I could not. I returned to Wyoming a broken woman, and then I met Nathaniel. He was my salvation, a good, honorable man who deserved a wife without a scandalous past. I never told him about you, not out of shame, but out of love for him. I could not burden him with my secret. Please know, my sweet girl, that not a day has gone by that I have not thought of you, loved you, prayed for you. Giving you up was the greatest sorrow of my life. Forgive me. I did what I thought was best. Whispering Pines is your birthright. It is your home. Know that you were and always will be loved. Your mother, Rebecca. The letter fell from Emma's fingers. She looked up at Nathaniel. He was completely still, his face ashen. She was protecting me, he whispered, the realization dawning on him like a slow, painful sunrise. She thought the scandal, my pride, she thought I wouldn't love you as my own. He let out a choked sound, a mix of a laugh and a sob. She was wrong. I would have loved any child of hers. How could she not know that? The pain in his voice was a raw, open wound. Emma rose from the chair and went to him. placing a hand on his arm. She did what she thought was right, she said softly. He turned to her, and his eyes, for the first time, truly saw her. Not as a stranger, not as Rebecca's ghost, but as Emma, as Rebecca's daughter. You have her wisdom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. Her compassion, how did I not see it before? His touch was like a spark, sending a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the stuffy room and everything to do with the man standing before her. For a dizzying, timeless moment, the grief and the secrets and the years between them seemed to melt away, leaving only the two of them, connected by the ghost of a woman they had both loved. A loud clap of thunder shattered the spell. Nathaniel stepped back, the mask of the stoic rancher falling back into place, though not as securely as before. It's late, he said. We've both had a shock. We should rest. Emma nodded, her own emotions too raw and jumbled for words. As she turned to leave, he called her name. Emma! She paused in the doorway. I'm glad you found your way home, he said, and the simple words held a universe of meaning. Whatever happens next, this is your home now, for as long as you want it. Tears pricked her eyes. Thank you, she whispered and fled to her room before he could see her cry. She was home. She finally knew who she was. But as the storm outside began to break, a new and more dangerous storm was gathering. Victoria had lost the first battle, but Emma knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the war for Whispering Pines and for her very life had only just begun. The next morning, the air at Whispering Pines was clear and crisp, washed clean by the storm. But the calm was deceptive. It was the quiet before a battle. Nathaniel stood on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Emma joined him, accepting the second mug he offered. They stood in a comfortable silence, the revelations of the previous night hanging between them, not as a barrier, but as a newly forged, complicated bond. What now? She asked, the question she'd been wrestling with all night. Now we fight, he said, his voice firm. I sent a wire to an attorney in Cheyenne last night, James Harrington. He's the best in the territory. He'll be on the next stage. Will it be enough? She asked. Victoria's Blackwood's sister. They have all the money and influence. We have something better, Nathaniel said, turning to look at her, his blue eyes clear and determined in the morning light. We have the truth. He paused, his gaze softening. I spent the night thinking about Rebecca, about the choices she made, and I realized she wasn't protecting me from a scandal. She was protecting you. She knew what Victoria was. She knew the kind of obsessive hatred she was capable of. Giving you up wasn't an act of cowardice. It was an act of fierce, desperate love. She was saving your life. The thought hit Emma with the force of a physical blow. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had hidden her. Just then, the sound of a horse being ridden hard broke the morning quiet. Robert came galloping into the yard, his face pale and grim. He practically fell out of the saddle. Victoria, he gasped, breathless. She's on the move. Left Cedar Ridge at dawn, with Blackwood, Sheriff Hollister, and at least a dozen hired guns. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. They're coming here. They're not coming for a chat, Nat, Robert said, his eyes wide. They're armed for a war. The blood drained from Emma's face. This is my fault. No, Nathaniel said, his voice a low growl. This is Victoria's fault, and she is about to find out what happens when you bring a war to my doorstep. The quiet, grieving rancher was gone. In his place stood a commander. Robert, he barked, get the men. Every hand that can hold a rifle. I want them here, now. To Emma, he said, go inside. Help Mrs. Fletcher. Barricade the windows. I can fight, she protested. No, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Victoria wants you. Alive. You are the one thing I cannot risk. Now go. The next 2 hours were a blur of frantic preparation. Ranch hands, grim-faced and loyal, appeared from all corners of the vast property. They took up positions, checking their rifles, their movements efficient and practiced. These were not men who were easily intimidated. Inside, Emma and Mrs. Fletcher worked, turning the fortress-like house into just that, a fortress. As she stockpiled bandages and water, Emma caught sight of the old housekeeper calmly loading a double-barreled shotgun. "Been through worse," Mrs. Fletcher said, catching Emma's stare. "Mr. Thornton will see us through." "They're here," Nathaniel said from the doorway. Emma rushed to the kitchen window. A small army was arrayed at the edge of the yard. Victoria and Blackwood were at the front, their faces masks of cold fury. Nathaniel strode onto the porch, flanked by Robert and a half-dozen of his best men. "That's far enough, Mrs. Sullivan," he called out, his voice ringing with authority. "State your business and be on your way." "You know my business, Thornton," Victoria shrieked, her voice shrill with rage. "I have a warrant for that little thief. I'm here for my ward." "She's not your ward," Nathaniel called back. "And we both know it. Her name is Emma Grace Hayes, daughter of Rebecca Thornton." The public declaration seemed to stun Victoria into silence for a moment. Then a cruel, ugly smile spread across her face. "So the little bitch found her mother's letter? It doesn't matter. It changes nothing. She is proof that your sainted Rebecca was a liar and a whore." The insult hit the air like a physical blow. Emma saw Nathaniel flinch, his knuckles turning white where he gripped the porch railing. "You will not speak that name on this land," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Leave. Now." "Not without the girl," Blackwood bellowed, drawing his pistol. "Give her to us, or we'll burn this place to the ground and take her from the ashes." That was when the first shot rang out. It came not from the porch or from Blackwood's men, but from an upstairs window. One of the hired guns slumped in his saddle, a dark stain spreading on his shoulder. Mrs. Fletcher's shotgun. All hell broke loose. The yard exploded in a cacophony of gunfire. Emma threw herself to the floor as a bullet shattered the kitchen window, spraying glass across the room. The siege had begun. For what felt like an eternity, the battle raged. The ranch hands, experienced in defending their home, were more than a match for Blackwood's undisciplined thugs. But there were so many of them. Emma, huddled in the pantry, felt a suffocating sense of helplessness. Men were risking their lives, bleeding, maybe even dying for her. Suddenly she heard a new sound. Not gunfire, but a roar, a crackling, hungry sound. And she smelled it. Smoke. She scrambled back to the broken kitchen window and peered out. Her blood ran cold. The far barn was on fire, and the wind was blowing the flames directly towards the house. It was a diversion. While the men were pinned down at the front, someone had snuck around the back. Victoria wasn't just trying to take her. She was trying to destroy everything, to erase Whispering Pines from the face of the earth. Just then, Nathaniel burst into the kitchen, his face smeared with soot, his eyes wild. "The barn's gone," he said grimly. "We have to get the horses out of the main stable before it goes up too." He saw the look on her face. "Emma, I told you to stay in the cellar." "They're trying to burn you out," she cried. "It's a trap." "I know," he said, grabbing a bucket of water. "But I can't let those animals burn." "I'm coming with you." "No! You need every pair of hands you can get," she insisted, grabbing a bucket of her own. "She is my mother's daughter, Nathaniel. I am not going to hide while her home burns." He stared at her for a second, a flicker of something, pride, awe, fear in his eyes. He gave a sharp nod. "Stay behind me." They ran out the back door into a hellscape of smoke and flying embers. The heat was intense. The main stable was just yards from the burning barn, its roof already starting to smolder. Inside the stable, the horses were screaming, their eyes rolling in terror. Nathaniel and Robert worked with frantic efficiency, cutting them loose, driving them out the far doors and into the open pasture. Emma, her lungs burning, worked alongside them, her fear overridden by a surge of adrenaline. She grabbed the reins of a terrified mare, Daisy, her gentle lesson horse, and pulled her toward safety. As she cleared the stable door, a piece of the burning barn roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. The mare reared, pulling the reins from Emma's grasp. Emma stumbled backward, falling hard. She looked up and saw a figure emerge from the smoke. It was Maxwell Blackwood, his face a grotesque mask of triumph, a pistol in his hand. End of the line, little bird, he snarled, leveling the gun at her. Emma! Nathaniel's roar was primal. He launched himself at Blackwood from the side, a pure, unthinking explosion of protective fury. They crashed to the ground, rolling in the dirt and mud, a tangle of limbs and curses. Blackwood was younger, heavier, but Nathaniel was fueled by a rage that was 10 years in the making. He fought not just for Emma, but for Rebecca, for the life they had built, for the legacy Victoria was trying to turn to ash. A shot exploded next to Emma's head. She scrambled away as the two men wrestled for the gun. It went off again, harmlessly, into the sky. Suddenly, another figure appeared through the swirling smoke. Victoria. Her beautiful face was contorted with hate, her hair wild, her elegant clothes torn and dirty. She held a flaming torch, pulled from the burning barn. If I can't have her, no one can, she screamed, her voice cracking with madness. She raised the torch, her eyes locked on Emma, but she never got the chance to throw it. From the chaos, a new sound emerged, the thundering of hooves. A posse of riders, at least 20 strong, crested the hill, led by a man in a dusty suit. It was James Harrington, the attorney, and he had brought the law, not the corrupt Sheriff Hollister, but the territorial marshals. Blackwood, seeing the marshals, gave Nathaniel a final desperate shove and scrambled to his feet, trying to run. But Robert was there, and a single well-aimed punch sent the big man sprawling into the mud, unconscious. Victoria stood frozen, the torch still in her hand, her mad plan crumbling around her. She looked from the marshals to Emma, and then to Nathaniel, who was slowly getting to his feet, bruised but victorious. The hatred in her eyes was a pure elemental force. "This was all for you, William," she whispered to the empty, smoky air. "All for you." Then with a final defiant scream, she turned and ran directly into the burning stable. "Victoria, no!" Emma cried out, but it was too late. A moment later, the main beam of the stable roof gave way, and the entire structure collapsed inward in a deafening roar of fire and collapsing timber. Victoria Blackwood was gone. Silence fell over the yard, broken only by the crackle of the dying fires and the exhausted, ragged breathing of the survivors. It was over. In the days that followed, the story came out. James Harrington, a man who left nothing to chance, had suspected Victoria might retaliate. He hadn't gone to the judge. He had gone to the territorial marshals with Rebecca's letter and evidence of Blackwood's corruption. They had arrived not a moment too soon. With Blackwood in custody and Victoria dead, the web of deceit she had woven for 17 years finally unraveled. Blackwood, hoping for a lighter sentence, confessed everything: the fraudulent warrant, the hired guns, the plan to burn Whispering Pines to the ground. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. The ranch was scarred but not broken. The main house had been saved. The livestock were safe. The land, blackened and charred in places, would heal. Wyoming was a place of resilience. It always grew back, stronger than before. One evening, a week after the fire, Emma and Nathaniel stood on the ridge overlooking the ranch. The setting sun bathed the valley in a soft, golden light. "It's still beautiful," Emma said softly. "It is," Nathaniel agreed. He turned to her, and the weary sadness that had lived in his eyes for a decade was gone. In its place was a quiet, profound peace. "Rebecca's letter," he said. "She called this place your birthright." Emma looked out at the vast expanse of land, her land. "It feels like it," she said. "She would be so proud of you, Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have her strength, her courage, her heart." He took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. It felt natural. It felt right. "When I found you," he said, "I thought I had found a ghost. But I was wrong. I was the one who was a ghost, haunting my own life. You brought me back, Emma. You brought this ranch back to life." "We did it together," she said, squeezing his hand. He looked at her then, and the years between them, the secrets, the grief, all of it faded away, leaving only the undeniable truth of the bond they had forged in the heart of a storm. It wasn't the love he had shared with Rebecca. It was something new, something different, something that was theirs alone. Whispering Pines needs a mistress, he said, his voice a low rumble. A partner, not just in business, but in life. Tears of joy welled in Emma's eyes as she looked up at this good, strong man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. I'm home, Nathaniel, she whispered. I'm finally home. He smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made him look 10 years younger. And as he leaned in and kissed her, under the vast, endless Wyoming sky, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the secrets of the past and the promise of a future, finally free of ghosts. The story of the runaway bride and the grieving rancher became a legend in that part of Wyoming, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with a fairy tale, but rise from the ashes of tragedy, stronger and more resilient than you could ever imagine. If you were gripped by Nathaniel and Emma's story of survival and second chances, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was Nathaniel right to protect Emma from the very beginning? I can't wait to hear from you.